Hi, and welcome to this week's Midweek Encouragement. I'm Pastor Andrew, and I pray you're doing well. I want to encourage you today by reading Psalm chapter 4, verse 8, in which we see the psalmist writes these words. He says, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. You and I have very likely experienced times of anxiety or hesitancy as a result of some external force or some situation that we may be facing. It could be a health concern. It could be a relational difficulty or a relational issue. It could be something at work. It could be a number of things that may cause us anxiety. And many of you likely have experienced issues that may have caused you to have a sleepless night, where you've been so focused on the external situation that's going on or the trouble that you're facing that you have trouble sleeping. And we know that David himself, and the psalmist, of course, we see says that he has had trouble after trouble. Yet here in Psalm 4 verse 8, we see that he says that he's going to lie down and he's going to sleep and he's going to be at peace because God is going to keep him. I want to encourage you today by prayerfully reminding you of the great fact that even in the worst of our troubles, that we can trust in God, that we can be at peace, we can have hope in Him, and that we can rest safely assured that He is Lord. In the chapter prior to Psalm chapter 4, our text today, in Psalm chapter 3, we see a specific occurrence in which David again writes of this idea in which he is able to sleep and rest in the Lord. In Psalm chapter 3, we see that there is, of course, the occurrence in which David and his own son Absalom have come to a disagreement, so much so that they are enemies. They are at enmity with one another. Absalom is even seeking the life of his own father David. He has sought out counselors who were at one time David's own counselors, and he's seeking wisdom as to how to go about taking his father's life that he might become king. David in Psalm 3 verse 1 puts it clearly by saying this. Of course, this descriptive of Psalm 3 verse 1 says this is a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom his son. David says, Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. And David is not being hyperbolic here. He's not exaggerating. He is very much so being right in his wording, because if we consider the historical text of 2 Samuel, in which we see the counselors who have come to Absalom to give him advice on how to go about taking David off the throne and ultimately killing him, we see that two pieces of advice are given. In the first two verses of 2 Samuel chapter 17, we see one of David's counselors named Ahithophel puts it this way. It says, Moreover, Ahithophel said unto Absalom, Let me now choose out 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue after David this night. And I will come upon him while he is weary and weak-handed, and will make him afraid. And all the people that are with him shall flee, and I will smite the king only. Now, a few verses later, at verse 12, we have a secondary counselor come to Absalom, and he suggests that this be the occurrence. It says in verse 12, So shall we come upon him in some place where he shall be found, and we will light upon him as the dew falleth on the ground. And of him and all of the men that are with them, there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he be gotten into a city, then shall all Israel bring ropes to that city, and we will draw it into the river, until there be not one small stone found there. It's here that we see David's plea for help unto the Lord in Psalm 3 is very much so warranted. He is being pursued by Absalom and those who are at enmity with David. We see that the counselors give this suggestion. One says, let us go and simply kill the king, whereas the secondary counselor says, let us go and destroy every single person who's with him, so much so that we will turn everything over and there won't be a stone standing upon another. Let us completely go out and destroy him. And thus it would be likely that David would have anxiety. It would be likely that David would have fear and hesitancy. And while, of course, he does cry out to the Lord, he seeks the Lord's favor and seeks the Lord's mercies. I want you to notice in Psalm chapter 3, a few verses into that text, we see David says something that seems perhaps paradoxical to his situation. Psalm chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Now, we've just seen that Absalom and his counselors and all those who are on his side are seeking to kill David and destroy all those around him. Yet David, in Psalm 3, verse 5 and 6, says this. He says, I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. This is very much so reminiscent to his words in Psalm chapter 4, the very next psalm, our main text today, verse 8, in which he says, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. I am very much so reminded of the many situations in our lives that may cause us hesitancy and worry and anxiety. There are times in which we've perhaps had sleepless nights due to worrying about the situations we face. And perhaps you're there at this moment, or perhaps you're considering a time in which you can look back and say, there were many sleepless nights that I faced because I was so hesitant or because I was so worried or grievous of this situation that was going on. And I want to encourage you today by simply pointing you to the reality that those who are outside of Christ may worry and may struggle and may have anxiety with no hope to cling to. But the Christian has great hope. The believer in God has great hope. Very much so that we see that while we can imagine someone who is facing a sleepless night, someone who may be facing some type of anxious insomnia, that the Christian can truly rest in the Lord, that we do not have true need to be anxious, that we, when we consider who God is and what he has done, what he's doing now, and what he is able to do, that we can look to him and say, I don't have to worry. I don't have to be in a state of anxiety. I can trust in him. And in doing so, we could be like David and say, I can sleep in peace, even despite of the fact that there are people seeking my own life. David would be able to say, I can sleep and trust in the Lord. He's looking out for me. I'm reminded very much so of David Guzik's words on King David himself. I love that he puts it this way. He says, David could sleep well at night, even in distressing times and surrounded by the ungodly. He slept well because his safety was from the Lord, not from circumstances or even feelings. He trusted in the Lord. He therefore had a gladness that the world could not take away. And it's here that I want to remind you, of course, that we have very much to have cause perhaps to pause and reflect on in this life that may allow us the opportunity to be anxious or to be hesitant or to worry. But we need to remember that those situations, God is still in control even in that time. Even when it seems like the world is turning against us, even when it seems like everything is falling apart, that there is hope in God. He is able to work in such a way as to bring about peace even in calamity and hardship. I would pray that you would take the words of Jesus Christ himself to heart in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, in which we see Jesus says these words. He says, Matthew 6:27, which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit unto his stature? Now, I love how the New American Standard Bible puts it. It says, and which of you, by worrying, can add a single day to his lifespan? Perhaps a more modern idea as to how we could phrase this is found in the words of Vance Havner. Vance Havner says, worry like a rocking chair, will give you something to do, but it won't get you anywhere. And oftentimes we might be tempted to worry and to doubt and to be filled with anxiety, and that might cause us not to be able to rest in the sovereignty of God. But I want to encourage you today to, instead of focusing on the storms, focusing on the hardships, focusing on the issues, we focus on the Lord who is providential in his mercy. We focus on Christ who is sufficient for our every need. We focus on the God and Father who is able to provide for us like no one else can. I would pray that we would take the words of Solomon to heart in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, in which we see those very familiar words to many, in which Solomon says, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." I'm not going to lie to you today. We are tempted to be anxious. I'm tempted to be anxious. There are many situations that I face personally that I'm tempted to worry instead of trusting God. But my prayer for myself and my prayer for you is that we would begin to put into practice a trusting in God, that we would say, instead of worrying, instead of focusing on the downside, instead of focusing on the situation or the hardships or the what ifs, the things that likely never will come to be, that we focus on the truth of who God is, that God is a God of peace. He is a God who is able to provide us comfort and stability even when the world is falling around us. I pray that you find hope and comfort in this truth today, that God is able to provide peace for you when the world would have you be anxious. There's much that we could worry about, but worrying gets us nowhere. What gets us somewhere is trusting in God and following after him and knowing that he is sovereign over all things. My prayer for you is that you face that reality today, that you see the sovereignty of God at work in your life, and that you're able to say, I can lay down, I can rest in the sufficiency of Christ, I can rest in God's merciful providence, I can rest in who he is. And like David, we can be at peace and say, God is my security. In him I am safe and secure. I pray that you have a wonderful rest of your week to come, and may God bless you.